On this day, the 28th of January, 1624, the first English colony was established in the West Indies. It's always interesting to see the beginnings of great things. The British Empire, which once controlled a huge amount of the world, started off in a very humble way. A few settlements that clung to the east coast of what is now North America, and a few little unimportant islands in the West Indies. One of these was a place called St. Christopher, today known as St. Kitts, part of the dominion of St. Kitts and Nevis. This little island used to be populated by the local Caribs, the local Indian tribe that lived in many of these islands. St. Kitts was chosen by the man Thomas Warner because it was seen to be a favorable place for settlement. The story of St. Kitts is an interesting one, and the story of its founder, Thomas Warner, even more so. Thomas Warner, like many men, was born not as a great man. He wasn't a lord. Lords very rarely gave up their titles and lands and privileges at home and went out to the New World. It was usually the lesser sons of minor lords, or educated men, or military men, as was the case with Thomas Warner. He entered military life at an early age, and after this, he became a captain in James I's Guards. So, he had managed to climb his way up out of obscurity and into a position of great influence, right next to the king. At this point, England, or you could say possibly Britain, because there was one man, James I, who was King of England, and James VI of Scotland, and James I of Ireland. So all three kingdoms were now united under one crown, in one man, although not yet politically united. Even so, this jumble of kingdoms off the coast of Northern Europe was not exactly the most important place in the world at this point. It would obviously go on to become one of the centers of the world, but at this point no one knew that. But there was some plucky men, such as Thomas Warner, that wanted not necessarily to change history, but just wanted to make themselves great. And along the way, if they were going to settle a place, and possibly in the future it was going to make their country great, I'm sure it might have crossed their minds that this would have been something that they could leave to the next generation. So Thomas Warner accepted assignment to the colonies, which didn't really exist at this point. He took his family to a place in what is now Guyana, a place called Oyapok, and it was settled in 1620. Obviously the people who settled it had great ambition for it, although like the Scots later at the Darien, with Darien scheme, settling in that swamp-infested, mosquito-infested place between Panama and Colombia, this didn't go well. The Dutch controlled the coasts, modern-day Suriname down to French Guiana, but they controlled that area, and so it was abandoned later that year. So, in 1623, Warner abandoned his Guyana post and set north through the archipelago of Lesser Antilles. It was suggested to him that one of the smaller islands might be a better place to establish a settlement. And if you know anything about these little islands, they are perfect for settlement. They're surrounded by the sea, they're temperate, they've usually got large volcanic mountains, so there's a cool place that you can build a nice little veranda, sort of plantation house up the mountain. There's plenty of water, the soil is good, and they weren't very heavily populated. So, after looking for his perfect place, he came across St. Christopher, what was called St. Christopher by Columbus, and which became nicknamed by the English and the settlers there as St. Kitts. So it was noted that this island was strategically positioned in the center of that corner of the Caribbean. The natives were friendly, there was fertile soil, lots of water, salt deposits, which were very important back then. He and his family landed on the island and made contact and peace with the local peoples. So they were a part of the Kalinago tribe. Warner then left his family on the island and returned to England to gather more settlers to establish a colony. And he came back with the support of a family called the Jeffersons. Apparently spelt differently, but apparently Thomas Jefferson could be one of their descendants. So they brought 2 vessels with settlers and supplies, and on the 28th of January 1624 they established the colony of St. Christopher, and our man Thomas Warner established a port town at Old Road. This was the beginning of the English Empire and later the British Empire in the West Indies. After the establishment of this colony, about a year later, a French captain, Pierre Belin Desnabouc, I think that's pronounced, arrived at St. Christopher. He had organized a fleet of colonists hoping to establish a colony as well. Seemed to be all the rage back then. The French were doing it, the English were doing it, the French had already done it, the Spanish, had already done it. And he had heard about the success of the English settlement on St. Kitts. His fleet had been destroyed by a run-in with the Spanish. The Spanish weren't very happy with the whole anyone else getting involved because they had made the Treaty of Tordesillas, which had split the world between them and the Portuguese. So apparently no one was allowed to take territories in the New World except for the Spanish and Portuguese, which everyone promptly ignored. And so this French fella had not had a great time. So he arrived at St. Kitts, and very oddly, the English settlers took pity on the French settlers, and Warner invited them to settle on the island as well. So they decided that the very north of the island and the very south of the island, Basse-Terre and whatever the north is for, but there's Basse-Terre and the other Terre, and the middle part would be the English part. And this lasted until the Treaty of Utrecht, when the French finally ceded these territories on St. Kitts. So they then used these positions on the islands, the French and the English, to expand neighbouring islands. So the French used it as a stopping off point or jumping off point from Martinique, a much larger and much more important settlement, which is still a part of France. They also used it to settle St. Bart's, Bartholomew, and the English used it to take Antigua, settle there, and Nevis, which is just south of the island of St. Christopher, and Montserrat, which is still a British territory. And so they started to expand from these small little established settlements on St. Christopher itself. Now, the locals first welcomed the settlers. However, as more and more Europeans started arriving, the locals became suspicious and frightened of the number of settlers that were coming in. I think you can guess what was about to happen. So, the local chief of the tribe in 1626, had a secret meeting with another group on the modern-day island of Dominica. The natives had decided to ambush the European settlements on the night of the next full moon. The plan was revealed by a woman who had been a slave of one of these tribes, and she was an Arawak, and for some reason she had fallen in love with Warner. I don't know how she would have known Warner if she was a slave of one of these other tribes, but anyway, she came forward and told the Europeans what was going to happen. The English and the French joined forces and decided to attack first. In the ensuing battle, between 100 and 120 Caribs were killed. And then the French and the English set about fortifying the island against the expected invasion that was going to come. So, in the ensuing battle, when the Caribs came to St. Christopher, 3,000 to 4,000 Caribs took up arms against the Europeans, and we don't know exactly how many died, but it's estimated thousands, maybe 2,000 Kalinago men were killed. So some people say it was a genocide, although it looks more like a battle to me. They were planning to wipe out the Europeans, and the Europeans fought back. And yes, they had better weapons, and ended up with the Caribs being defeated. Many of them then fled to the island of Dominica, which became a holdout for the Caribs because it was such a mountainous place. And it was only a lot later that the French were finally able to conquer Dominica and put down the various revolts and incursions that came down from the mountains. So Dominica for a long time was Carib territory, and many Caribs from other islands would eventually flock to Dominica. After this unpleasantry, it does seem that the French and English colonies on St. Christopher thrived and did very well. Warner was appointed as a parliamentary governor of the Caribbean islands in 1643, so that was during English Republican time, and he took a Carib woman as a common law wife and had many children with her. By the time he had died, it says that he was worth, in today's money, about £100 million, which is not a bad way to end life, being the governor and having your own colony and having £100 million lying about. So this man who came from pretty much nothing, Thomas Warner, on this day established the first English colony in the Caribbean, and from there became probably one of the wealthiest men of his day. There you have it, the first English colony in the Caribbean. Come back tomorrow for more. If you like what you hear and see, subscribe and comment.